in those threads.
I think got it right in before the recording.
That's it. All right, so I'm just going to sort of get us started and get us on time. For nuts and bolts. And I'll make sure that everybody has a chance to introduce themselves after I do. So what I'm going to do, we got a little bit of a late start, so I'm going to keep the attention that each group will get will be approximately 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to look for the reviewers. The main reviewer to take about 10 to 15 minutes, no more, to present their review. And each person has been designated as a main reviewer for one of the proposals. And then we'll use the extra 10 to 5 minutes, depending on what we've got, to let the other reviewers weigh in if they disagree or if they just have additional comments that they think are useful for you to hear. You guys are supposed to be a fly on the wall. Jokes aside, no rebuttal. It's, and it's mock. I want to make sure all of you guys know and everybody knows this has absolutely no implication on your funding, your future funding, nothing like that. None of these people, at this point have any ability to pull the strings on any of that. Okay? So it's really just for learning, maybe fun, but definitely learning. And it's mock,
And as a caveat, I reviewed actual ACE awards at the time, and then I'm sure, did as well. And I did this review very differently than when I was really reviewing for the awarding of the ACE awards, because then it's a pilot thing, it's a new structure, it's really who has the potential. And this I've been sitting on NIH study sessions for about 15 years in a bunch of different settings, and I did this much more as I would an NIH review, and so was much more stringent and harsh and all of those things. So just to be aware that, not only does this not count, but it's also a different mindset and process on at least my part.
Absolutely. And I forget the exact phrase, but they always say, but your best friends in this business are those that are going to be the harshest on you. So while it may feel uncomfortable, know that it's way better for somebody on the inside to be hard on you than it would be to go through all the sweat and pain and hope of submitting somewhere and then having somebody come back and say, this is really a fatal flaw. So that being said, in just another minute here, we will start with the first proposal. This is our last session, so this is our grand finale. And I debated a little bit ending on this stuff because I was afraid it might feel harsh, but I think you've all grown up a great deal and are ready. Now you can handle it. But yeah, I'm sure you'll fly. So no, I just want to say thank you to everybody, every team. You guys have done a tremendous amount of work. I have had a lot of fun doing this with all of you, and it's been incredibly satisfying to see everybody take these steps. So I thank you for your hard work, and I thank you for the bravery, frankly, of doing this whole curriculum for the first time, especially those of you who are newer to the process, that idea of having this idea that you're really passionate about and opening it up to others. It's hard. It's kind of almost an emotional type of learning sometimes. So I really appreciate how you've engaged with the course and with each other, and this has been great. I really think that you were the perfect first class. First cohort. So we are going to start with Mackenzie and Hevel. Mackenzie and Hevel, and that is
no, Brian and Liz.
Okay, that's right. You looked at Brian and Liz.
Okay. I'm supposed to be Stevie and Liz, Stevie Health Workers. We are waiting on one more reviewer to come. So she's the lead for that group. So we're switching it around.
Oh, yeah, sorry, because some people need to leave and some people need to come late.
So they'll go second. So Martin, once Diane arrives, Diane and I, she'll go second.
Oh, Diane's coming?
And just to orient my reviewers, thank you so much. I know that I have never done this before, so there were probably lots of things I would do differently and wish I had said and didn't. So I appreciate it.
You went first.
So, for example, I have confusion between, I don't have the titles on them.
Okay. So Raymond and O'Neill are the community health workers. They're first.
Okay.
Martin is cancer. No, that's
That's
Mackenzie.
Martin,
Whitey at Youth Tobacco Survey.
Okay.
And Mackenzie would be third, which are the cancer group, and obesity is last. Levada.
So this might seem strange to you guys, but I'm probably going to time things because I want to make sure everybody gets, you know, their fair attention. So I'll give you kind of if you hit 10 minutes, I'll give you a 10, and then I'll let you know when there's 5 minutes left so we can let other people. All right, so for the third time, I'm sorry, they're going first.
Yes.
And
Then Martin.
okay, and who was the lead reviewer for? Was it you?
Oh, that's me.
That's you.
For
Oh, fine.
Diana.
All right, you ready?
Yeah. So first, I wanted to just mention that what we are doing, we are basing the evaluation on the NIH criteria, which are significance, innovation, approach, and also the team, team also evaluation of the team. So since the proposals were not exactly built according to this, significance, approach, innovation, etc. What I did for my reviews is, so I put all the engagement plan, method, learning and mentorship goal, research and dissemination plan into the big overhead of approach. Anyway, so let me start. So in this proposal, the investigators wish to understand the value of the community health workers from the patient and their family perspective, and develop standardized program evaluation tools to assess the effectiveness of community health worker based and on the identified themes of the patients and through multiple focus groups. So it's for me it's a very significant research. There is a definite need for standardization and harmonization of the role of the community health workers. Multiple grants, currently there are community health workers in Delaware, but they are only funded by grants, and there is a really nice table at the end of the proposal showing this. And so the goal is, there is a need for standardizing the payment and the value and the evaluation of the health workers. So this grant is certainly, there is really a large significance. Related to innovation, although community-based participatory research is not a new method, it is innovative in this context where the investigators are developing program evaluation tools. Regarding the approach, so I don't know, anyway. Regarding the approach, I think the engagement plan could be a little more detailed and probably less focused on what was done in the past. There is a long paragraph about the engagement plan with the state and how there was a meeting with the state stakeholders. It seems to me that for this type of grants or for the engagement plan, it would probably be more or better to look at the PCORI criteria for engagement plan, which and go through each of the steps of the PCORI engagement plan, which are planning the study, conducting the study, disseminating the study results, and PCORI engagement principles, such as partnership, time commitment, trust, transparency, honesty. And this is, in the proposal, this was done, but at different levels of the proposal. So there's a little engagement plan. There is a paragraph engagement plan, but then there is some engagement into the methods and engagement into the future research. So and dissemination plan. So I think it probably would be a little better constructed if all the engagement sentences and paragraphs or engagement-related themes were into the engagement plan, and decrease what had been done, with the state. The methods, CBPR and qualitative methods of analysis are very well described. There is a paragraph also at the end related to dissemination strategies which are included into the method that probably would fit better into the future research and dissemination plans. The learning and mentorship goals are very well described. The future research and dissemination plans. This paragraph does not really discuss actually the future research and dissemination plans. It is in fact an excellent paragraph for significance because I really learned even more the significance from this paragraph. But there is no mention on what are the future research, such as evaluating the survey, which I think is really the next step that should be done into this research, as well as some discussion about funding, future funding. And again, there is a paragraph in the methods section that would really fit well here in the dissemination plan. And the team description development plan for team, the team is highly qualified with years of research and experience in working with the community and experience in a breadth of areas such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, maternal infant health, and obesity. So overall, my overall score, and I gave scores to each section, but my overall score, I gave it 3.
I think you covered many of the points that I had. I think in addition, the strength that I saw of this project was really the importance of multiple perspectives and the patient's perspective. But in addition to assessing not only the value, you talk about in the specific aims of really getting at whether or not it's perceived as being useful. So I used, but it wasn't as explicit as it could be, and I think there's a strength of not only understanding the value of it, but whether or not they perceive it as being helpful.
And I think that, the only thing I would add, Claudia did a great job, so there's not much, but I think to me the biggest weakness of it was like having the stage set wrong in the introduction, in a way, where the introduction was talking about value-based purchasing and health system improvement and a lot of things that sort of set me up one way, and then you started talking about importance and usefulness to the patients, which is super important, but you never said why that or how that was going to change these other things, or how the outcomes that you got were going to influence how the programs that you mentioned in the introduction worked. And so to me it was sort of like, so they're identifying one problem and then they're doing a project and they haven't made it very clear to me. And remember that, when NIH reviewers or anyone does this, they don't work at it very hard. I mean, right? You have to lead them about by the nose, really. And that was to me the biggest weakness of this proposal, was that it didn't, to me, and I think that some of what Claudine said about future research and so on, that could have come there, but I would change the introduction too and make it more clear that, going forward, we recognize that for these kinds of, to really improve care and reduce readmissions and reduce the costs of chronic care, we really need to do things that engage and activate patients. And there's a thought that community health workers might do that, but we don't really know. And that's why we're doing this research. And that's when this research will change. And so, but I thought that the overall plan to do what you intended to do was, as Claudine said, very, very good, and the team was good, and there's no reason you couldn't do what you said you were going to do. But as it existed now, I felt that was, a pretty moderate weakness, and so I gave it a 4 overall.
Low numbers are good, I'm guessing.
Yeah, low is best. one is the best.
So I reviewed this proposal as well, and I agree with my biggest criticism of the proposal was in the rationale for why it was important to show that community health workers were valuable. So despite my sort of just off feeling of, oh, they are valuable, but why is that like an important thing to sort of demonstrate? And so I think that really goes back to sort of the rationale for setting the stage for the study. I had some, how do you make that case? Is it that, did we want to create this sort of standardized instrument that looks at the benefits of a community health worker across different studies so that you would then say, they would be helpful in this kind of setting, but not in that kind of setting? That was kind of where my head was going, but I felt like that really needs to be sort of, strengthened in the proposal. I agree that the research methodology was excellent. I actually thought the engagement plan was pretty good, was pretty strong. And I agree that the team was excellent and that this, could be done just with setting up a better sort of rationale for this period. And I gave it a 3.
All right, so now that everybody's here, I'll make up for my lack of hostess duties at the beginning. And so we'll give Diana a minute to get settled, and we'll start in the back here. And if everyone will just say your name, where you're from, and one bullet point of what is your role in the CTR, then those of us who haven't met before can become a little closer.
Well, I'm Steve Martin. I'm from the University of Delaware Center for Drug and Health Studies, and I sort of got 2 roles in the CTR. One here being the research lead on this CEO project, and I'm also the lead on the co-lead on the evaluation section of the overall CTR.
I'm Eileen Sparling from the Center for Disability Studies at the University of Delaware, and I'm one of the community investigators on the Youth Tobacco Survey Project, and I'm sort of representing that disability voice for this project. And I apologize for being late. 95.
I think my recommendation is do not schedule these next year during rush hour.
It took me over an hour from Newark.
5 a.m. next year.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah. Liz Dubrovchich, I'm Division of Public Health, and I'm also community investigator on the Youth Tobacco Survey Project, and ditto on the travel. I figured out, just after I passed the fork, I should have gotten off on 295 and come on 13, but, next time.
And Heather Bittner-Fagan, and I think everybody knows me. I'm from Christiana, and I've been the, person doing the ACE Awards.
I'm Iman Sharif, I'm a general pediatrician at Nemours, and I'm one of the co-directors for the CEO.
Sean Hebel, I'm the program director of the Cancer Support Community. I'm the community investigator for this escapade project.
And I'm Mike McKenzie. I'm from the Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition at the University of Delaware, and I'm the academic investigator on the examining survivors. See, it's easier to say escapade. Examining survivors of cancer and physical activity in Delaware.
Hello, I'm Kristen Isaac, research assistant on the community engagement and outreach component, working with Heather.
Hello. Rebecca Owens White, community engagement and community investigator for childhood obesity.
Liz O'Neill, I work in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. I'm the CEO of the Community Engagement and Outreach section of the CTR grant. Very green in research, but lots of experience in community-based programs around women's health.
I'm Brian Raymer. I'm one of the co-directors for Community Engagement and Outreach, KCA, for the Excel program. And I've worked with Liz and Heather and others in the Department of Community Medicine.
I'm Teresa Spencer. I'm at Nemours Health and Prevention Services and a pilot award recipient.
I'm Claudine Jokovic. I'm part of the EpiBiostat group for the CTR Axel grant, and I've been helping Heather and the team on some of the quantitative issues.
I'm Diana Badamarco. I have the biggest apology for being late since I was the latest. I'm the chief of a new division called Pediatric Population Health Research in the Department of Peds. And on the Excel grant, I'm the lead for mentoring at Nemours. And glad to be here.
I'm Seema Sonov. I'm the mentoring lead for CTR for Christiana Care and the head of the mentoring committee, as well as the director of health services research for the Valley Institute. And so I work with a lot of clinicians on research design and approaches.
All right, thank you everybody. And Diane, we knew you were going to be late, so we appreciate you being here. So nobody needs to apologize. It's all good. I'm just going to, because you were just a few moments late, I want to make sure you heard what everybody else heard. I mean, this is what the reviewers say here today will have no impact on anybody's funding competitiveness. It is absolutely a mock, with a capital M-O-C-K review for teaching purposes. I have told them that they have to be quiet and just listen, to the review, almost like they were a fly on the wall in a real review that they wouldn't be included in.
Oh, okay.
Surprise present.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. So we only have about, to keep on time, we have about 20 minutes to give each team. And because of timing issues, the review that you're doing, that team would like to leave early. So if you feel ready,
yeah, sure.
We start with you?
Let's
okay.
jump in.
I know it really hi, welcome. Go.
So typically, when we sit at study section, the first thing that we do, and since we're going to move this to a teaching thing, I'm going to explain as I go along. As the primary reviewer, we've come together. First of all, anything that is sort of not rated by the reviewers wouldn't get discussed. And all of you are in the lucky place today because you are being discussed and not triaged. My job would be, and with a little more prep time, I probably would do this better, but I can do it. My job would be to go over the intent of the grant and to really tell the other members, give them a summary of what the grant is doing. So I will go about that, and then I will give my review. And I ask, for those who are seasoned here, you know how this goes. But for those that are not, I ask that you listen with an open heart and not take anything negative. Don't internalize anything that comes up. And I believe mine is designing an approach for including youth with disabilities in the YTS. This is an interesting study as it is proposed. What makes it interesting is that they focus on the fact that the YRBS and the YTS do very little to attempt to discover the data of smoking from youth with disabilities. So in the current standards, the YTS is just a survey that goes, according to the proposal, a survey that goes to the typical classroom and not to classrooms where there may be disabled students. So at this point, the CDC has done very little to accommodate disabled students and to do surveillance on them for their tobacco use and the issues around tobacco. The study is going to bring together communities of people with disabilities, as well as public health representatives and academic researchers to assess strategies for including youth with disabilities in public health surveys. In the proposal, I would say that it would be nicer if it was clearer why bring up the youth risk behavior survey? Why not just focus on the YTS? Because it was a bit confusing as I read the proposal. There's not enough room, so it's very in these proposals that we do, even for NIH. So it's very, very important to get immediately to your point, and I think that would be helpful. So the research questions that the investigators plan to assess are students in special education classrooms able to participate in the YTS without accommodations, and what type of accommodations are needed for them to take the survey. And how do the specific modifications to the survey and their protocols, content, and the format of them affect the comprehension and completion rates? What implications do selected modifications to the survey have for overall validity and reliability of the YTS results in Delaware? And what additional research is needed in order to move this forward? There's a comprehensive engagement plan that has been put forward, and the specific aims, different than the research questions, are to determine the categories of Delaware students with disabilities and to enumerate those, develop a pilot and accommodation protocol for the YTS with students with disabilities, build capacity within the research community, and the long-term goal is to reduce disparities between the youth. They're going to collect and review existing literature as part of their methods, compile data. They say they're going to brainstorm. We'll come back to that. Use classroom observation and in-depth interviews, and do focus groups. They'll provide a summary report and disseminate findings through publication through publications. The variables that they want to measure include comprehension of content, time to complete, completion rates, validity, and reliability. And they have a brief statistical plan here. It's really, I would say that my thoughts about this is that in terms of significance, this is really high. The fact that we don't understand, we do know from the literature that folks with disabilities have higher rates of tobacco use. That's absolutely clear. What we don't know is how specific, what their issues are around tobacco use and about their barriers to cessation, which we can probably assume there are many, but there is a gap in the literature, the scientific literature on that question. Getting right to the review, as I said, the significance is high, and I think adapting collecting methods and measures, both for the disabled population, really would have a high impact. Well, in terms of innovation, the YTS is not at all innovative. The YTS has been around for a lot of years. It's a gold standard surveillance instrument from the CDC. But the use of YTS has not been, as I said, with children with disabilities, so that is an innovative factor, I think, of this grant. In terms of the approach, I thought the weakness is in the approach, and the reason I think that is because I think that the methods lack specificity, and that is the only way reviewers would know if you can do what you say you're going to do. So, for instance, CBPR is mentioned, but the methods around how you would do or approach CBPR are not. And I think we have to be careful because there are now very clear methods in CBPR, and they've been validated. And so mentioning those methods specifically would be really important. And one other issue I had is I wondered if this was really CBPR or if this perhaps was participatory action research. And there is a distinction between those two, and if it's more expertly driven, that I would think that PAR would be more appropriate, but that really is left up to the investigators. So the other thing I would have liked to see is more explanation on the qualitative and quantitative analysis. There was little that explained to me how the analytic plan would be carried out. And I would just say that there are too many aims for a small pilot like this, and one of the aims is actually a goal. So really look at that to increase the strength of the application. I think one of the main strengths of the approach is it includes many community partners and seems to have hit all the community partners who should be players in this. Okay, in terms of impact, I guess, what we would normally do is that's where we would stop, and at the end we would re-put out our impact. In terms of impact, I still thought this had that this was a excellent application to move forward because of the meaningfulness, and I just believe from the team that they have more ability to improve the description of the approach. So I thought it was, overall a really good proposal.
Other reviewers?
Go ahead.
I just had additional comments and questions regarding the approach as well. I thought a strength was the use of the qualitative methods to inform the survey development, and then also the strength of the sort of a thorough use of partners at the academic, state, and community levels. The question I had was related to feasibility. I think in the time frame of about 2 months, you had to sort of analyze the qualitative data and then to develop a survey from that. So it was just more detailed information about how you expected to conduct both the qualitative and the quantitative components of the study.
So I totally agree with everything you said and related to the approach. For the innovation, what I thought also it was a very innovative project, mostly because basically it has never been done, and that this is the first team to do this all over the country. I mean, the youth tobacco survey is administered all over the country, and it's really the first time that this is approached. Related to the approach, I totally agree. I would have liked to have a little more details about the qualitative assessment. I know that there was a restriction in the space, but maybe, I mean, there were a few things that could have been deleted or simplified, and the probably in the study design we organized by qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis so that we know exactly what will be done. I had the same type of also comments that I had related to the engagement plan. I think I'd like to see for the engagement plan a little more details on, how are the people, all the people who are going to be engaged, and how they are going to participate in the design of the study and these kind of things. But overall, I mean, I gave a 3, and I thought that was an excellent application.
Tina, did you?
Just trying to think if I think that my concerns were more about why, other than what's been said, which I generally agree with, but why hasn't this been done before? And are there barriers that haven't been identified that have prevented youth with disabilities from having been involved in these surveys in the past? And if so, how is implementation going to address those barriers? Because this provides information and some pilot ideas about how to incorporate that, but it talks about those ideas as if once it's identified and designed that it can just be done, and not in terms of what prior barriers, like what if people had this idea before, and maybe they didn't, but why didn't they, and who's opposed to it, and those kinds of things. I think for implementation research especially, that it's important to
to identify how you're going to overcome barriers. And I think that in pilot funding for the NIH particularly, that's actually one of the things that they ask you to do, like not so much in R1s, they don't ask you to do that so specifically, but in K grants and in earlier grants, they specifically say what barriers might you face in both this project and in going forward to the next step, and how are you going to deal with them. And that was the piece that I just thought was missing from this, but otherwise, I agree that the methods were very strong.
And I also reviewed this proposal, and I agree with the significance. I think is very high in the innovation of trying this, in the disabled population. It's really important and innovative. My main limitation was, the lack of detail about. I think what Seema is getting to is how would the validity and reliability truly be assessed. So, I'm assuming that the barrier to doing this in the past has been that, it wouldn't be valid to do, in these disabled populations. And so how would we then show that performing this survey in that population is valid? What would be the gold standard? How would you test that the responses were, we're giving you the correct kind of information? And some more detail would be needed on that.
I kind of think that I was satisfied that they were going from the lit review, that they were really going in an area that was really not fully explored. And additionally, I thought that if their methods had more detail, it was almost clear, not quite, but almost clear that their plan is to actually go in and model this to see if they could pilot what and to look at. Because if you're looking at disabilities, the other issue with this might be something if it were at NIH, but let's say we're not near NIH yet, we're looking for other funding. The other issue is disability is not one thing, right? So how do we accommodate different groups? Well, first we have to go in, and I like that the first aim was really identifying where disabled populations are in education and what kind of classifications there are, and then what kind of accommodations. And I thought they did a good job. I really do think they did a good job with that.
How about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for the last two proposals? People can get up, stretch, go. There's a restroom throughout the hallway and down there.
And we can
Your stash, you can all walk in and back.
And I had no address to come to. I'm going back.
It's almost like it's right here for some. And I think it is a mission because working with this.
I was totally like this.
I think there's 6 weeks of illness.
Well, in my county, it's 100 medical staff. My dog's like, I've been to the doctor 4 times in the last 4 weeks. So it's like, but then on Friday, and I had no plans. I didn't have things that were infectious. So on Friday he said, I'm not worried about it. He said, I'm going to see you on but I don't feel it's right. So, and it's not long. So that's another reduction. So I feel like outside. And what I'm trying to do this work is work every other day, and then every other day. But the days it's ridiculous because I'm not. Because I start at 7, my husband comes in at 6, and he criticisms of the 50 years. This means like it's not driving and resting.
you're just doing more.
inclusive. It was family members and, advocates, but it wasn't with the facilities themselves because I put a way to get feedback from them. So it's all over the place. So do you think it's
I've been investigating for different things.
I are really great experts.
So when you come to
So everything is coming So I'm run down because I was trying to keep I got a little sick and then instead of like paying attention and the stress, I'm looking at a couple of things. I didn't go last week on travel. And then I'm thinking I have a couple of trips coming up next couple of weeks. Well, I'll talk to you. I haven't made this time, like, everything, so I'm good to go, but yeah, we'll work that out. I'll let you know if I don't go. And if everything is okay with the scan rate, by like the weekend, I'll feel better.
So clear distinction.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to do it. We're going to
equity or inequity means that it sounds attributable.
Yeah, I feel I'm not caught. Yesterday morning I did go out today. I'm not caught. I have like very long voice. So I haven't been able to sing for like 5 minutes. And my singing teacher says, come anyway and sing. And I said, I was just like, no, I can't. I just don't even want to hear myself. So it's been,
if you know, like, then you have a so,
she had they said he had to,
so it's like, and this is my criticism, as you know, of the work that's just
we were all and
knowledge around disparity.
so we all, my husband and I, met too. We knew so the dog had a bite his lunches to get him to go out and it wasn't she heard something in the street and
say, hey, you know what, we really shouldn't work with, respiratory medication.
Terrible. And we knew that. But he was funny because she said, I think it's really good. The right voice was there. This dog can't get up. But he's trying to she said, Smitty, that's a dog.
One of the threats.
Yeah, so it's been
and then you did some
is the sense that
so I mean I know after I was all the time that everything else is great on the
oh yeah, right. I mean, you go to Northern California and I had 20 minutes of downtime to take a shower. Yeah, I got off the plane and was like, got in the bus, the shuttle, and thought, oh my God, something's wrong. I'm burning up and I'm freezing. And I got I slept for like 12 hours. Then I got up and I like was like just there. But then I felt better the second time, of course. But the trip was
the urgency is not
they were the
increasing because they
you know how
realize,
John was
especially very complex.
I was just gonna say, I was gonna say it was Stella.
I mean, they're like, and they love each other. Nancy and Catherine, I don't know. I know Catherine from Philadelphia, when she's going to
speak out for you know, I think
and then they eventually got to joking about it. But that conflict of giving us direction,
where it's not
we went into silence, then we came out of silence, and I didn't know what and we went into silence for a day, came out for a day, then went in for 3 days. And we were like, okay, so that was okay for 3 days, fine. Then we were out, and we were like, oh, okay, this is right. They said, and then 2 months later, we were doing that. And what some of us couldn't, like me, I had to work. I had to work my chair. He said, you ever hate you?
I don't need to laugh.
Yeah, right, I know. So I told him, I'll be out of this by Thursday.
Yeah.
And then he put us back in through Friday morning, and I couldn't do that. A big crisis with Jay. So it was like, oh, it was like, it wasn't as good as I used to be. Yeah, that's just it was big, and there were people back one of my favorite pals is a professor.
Have you talked to Mercedes
and she was brilliant, funny, great. We just sat there and snickered together and we did something. And there was the woman who created the yeah, that was wonderful. So we had there were so many good parties. The place was shabby, it was great, and there was no and then, you know, boom, boom, boom.
Usually I send Andrew Hart out every email list, so we wrote
because we couldn't make a mistake. But it was so she had earned it. But she so everyone had their questions. Did she take it away?
Robert Williams.
And everyone was like, how do you you're the rest. We can't say on our gut you don't get to see.
Just thinking of employees in terms of how
we invested to show them added up as more, and it showed each education
That's the whole thing.
So
that they
we'll see. But kicking off. I got teachers. I'm writing curriculum right now. Which is fun.
it's right down for
Should we go ahead and get everybody seated and start the church and just
It's better. I'll okay. I've watched like
yeah.
90 days most times.
Just grab her.
Yeah, I'll catch up.
Yeah, it's good for me to go and then you get to the other side of the street.
I'll give her a minute.
Probably scream my ankles.
We're going to give it to her.
her scarf. We should borrow her scarf today.
It was in the dark when I got
Just like you're perfect next to her.
All right, we'll get restarted with the last two proposals. I just want to say I think you guys are doing a really good job.
Yeah.
If it was me, I would be like, this is so helpful. So, keep it up. Seema, do you feel like you would be ready to go next?
I am. So this was, this grant was looking at survivors of cancer and physical activity in Delaware, and they gave the program a catchy name, Escapade, which is always good to do. And again, it's a community-based participatory research approach, and I think that in terms of significance, cancer survivorship is obviously an increasingly important issue, that this is an important area. I do think that it was, again, it's this thing that, like, the first sentence really sets the stage, and the first sentence said that, you know, Delaware seems to be among the states ranked lowest for cancer incidence and mortality. But in many ways, the proposal wasn't about incidence. The proposal was about improving survivorship. It was improving mortality through survivorship, but it wasn't. So when I started to go into it thinking, oh, we're trying to do exercise programs to prevent cancer. But no, in fact, we're trying to do exercise programs in survivors. And so it was a minor, it was really minor in the greater scheme of things, but just so you know that is something that, at least obviously for me, because this is now the second grant where I felt that way, that sort of those initial incentives set that. And I wasn't sure, like, why there was, where the gap was, like, the significance, because this is, in fact, an area where there's a lot of research, and it may be that it was the community elicitation of the needs that was the gap, but that wasn't made as clear as it could have been, at least to me. And I think that there's this whole question about why is there a belief, or what is your underpinning to make the statement that identifying these gaps and identifying the desires of the cancer community would change things about the amount of exercise and the use of exercise by cancer survivors. Why is the use of exercise by cancer survivors any different than the use of exercise by everybody, which sucks? Right. And so are these, like, cancer-specific exercise things? That wasn't made clear. Was it just general exercise, general physical activity opportunities? Was it cancer-specific? Was it, like cancer rehab programs or like cardiovascular rehab programs that people would want? Just none of that was made, to me, very clear of what the goal was. And there were some other community-based programs that weren't necessarily designed participatorily, but that did exist and that were very community disseminated. There's a couple of papers, for example, and this is also something to be aware of. This is that half the time NIH study sections are actually pretty specific, and you'd be amazed at how often the people on the study section have written papers, and if you don't cite their papers, then life sucks from the get-go. So for example, there's a program called the Beauty Program that Leach et al. Have written about that you didn't cite in your grant. So you know about the program, but you didn't cite in your grant. And there's some work by Foley and his group in Georgia about community-based exercise programs in cancer survivors. And again, it's not right. It's just that some reviewers will be those people, and then some reviewers will be like me and not necessarily know. And so I don't know that you knew about it, right? Because you didn't put it in there. So that's. So I just felt that while this is clearly really significant, that in some ways there was some lack of clarity in presenting that significance of this particular work, not of the disease area, but of what this work was going to address, what gaps it was going to close, and so on. I also, in this one, moving on to the innovation, agree that it was hard to tell if, I just felt that it was really hard to tell, and this is where I dinged this proposal a bit, or not a bit, a fair bit, was that it was novel and it changes research or practices, because again, community-based participatory research is thrown around, but not kind of how it's being really specified, like what it is about community-based participatory research that is different to this than other community-based exercise programs for cancer survivors. How is this really different and new? It just seemed more unclear than wrong. There was nothing where I said, that's wrong. It was more just like, I'm not seeing why this is so new and interesting. The partnership I thought was really strong, and the methods, my issue was something that Diane earlier identified, was this fact that the idea of community-based participatory research is being mentioned a lot, but the specificity of the methods isn't there for exactly how it's being done, and that you're following the guidelines and all of those sorts of things on what validated CDPR methods you're using and those kinds of things. I think the other thing is you didn't specifically say what cancers are going to be included and not included, right? There's been more research. There's been more standing research on the value of exercise, and part of it is because it's easier, right? In breast cancer, in colon cancer survivorship, a couple of others, not necessarily so much in let's say, lung cancer, or pancreatic cancer, or gastric cancer. Some of these cancers where, sorry, they don't survive anyway. But I don't think anywhere in the proposal did you say all comers, some comers, right? What stages, what those kinds of things. Bone cancer, would you include amputees after bone cancer, and what kind of the needs of them for physical activity be included in, whatever. NIH study sections, and I think unfortunately actually the core study sections are often much more interested in like the nitpicky details of things than in the overall picture. So I do think that this is an important area and one that can compete successfully for funding in other places, but it does need to make clear where it's going to go forward and what the next steps kind of are going to be in doing it. Because the outcomes, it was, for all that it was going to be just sort of this surveying the community, finding out what people wanted in the cancer community for exercise. Like, the actual outcomes were kind of unclear. Like, are you going to propose changes to exercise programs? Are you going to propose development of cancer rehab as part of standard therapy and get insurance to cover it the way they do cardiovascular rehab? I couldn't tell what the outcomes were, so I couldn't really speak to whether they were, which when an NIH reviewer can't speak to it, basically they just ding it. So, couldn't speak to that. I did think that this program did address the CTR and the goals of the ACEAL CEO really well. So I thought that was really strong, and it's an important area and a good partnership, but I felt that there was a lot of terminology being thrown around without clarity about what was really going to be done and how it would be applied to improve survivorship, and whether the goal was to improve actual survival, improve quality of life, improve self-efficacy, which might improve survival. What are the mechanisms in particular, and also any differentiation between factors that lead cancer survivors to not exercise versus those factors that lead everybody to not exercise, and what the differences are in what you're assessing. Things like, is it that women don't want to go out when they're bald but go to the gym when they're bald? Is it that the regular exercises classes or whatever are too hard? Is it that the walking paths aren't even enough if you're a survivor with amputation or whatever? But it just didn't distinguish like what's different about this than just going out and surveying the community about why they don't exercise. So I felt that was probably the kind of the biggest weakness. So I also wasn't clear to me in the mentorship plan that the mentor had community based participatory research experience. And so that wasn't made clear where that experience resides and where that knowledge of the valid ways to do it resides in this grant. And given how kind of central that ideal was to your methods, it just wasn't clear that the team as a whole had the chops to do it. And that's another very NIH thing that I've actually gotten grants back where they'll like identify a person at my institution and be like, if you're going to do this, so and so needs to be our grant because they're the ones who know how to do this where you are, and right, and this idea of if you're going to do something like that, you need to have the expertise in the team to do it. But I think that it's an area actually near and dear to my heart as a cancer survivor who in fact exercised like a crazy person during the whole thing and made my doctors be like, how the hell are you doing so well? No one does this well. And actually attributing much of that to the fact that I was whitewater kayaking and rock climbing and running and riding a bicycle and swimming through all of cancer. And in fact, interestingly, I had never done much swimming before and took up swimming because it was actually the one thing that like made the weird drugginess, chemotherapy drugs go away. Swimming actually made a huge difference. So anyway, so I think that this is really important to survivors. As a member of the PCORI advisory board, I would see this as being a very appropriate thing for PCORI because of that. But I think that that there's a lot of pieces that need to be clarified before we can go forward.
Thank you.
And just because you might care, the overall score was a 5. But again, the significance and importance was very high. It was the detail. So not because of that fatal in any way, because you can add detail.
Right.
Seema, before we let everybody else comment, I think what you said is an interesting segue to a question I obviously can't keep to myself. The NIH versus PCORI. PCORI has this lay person involved in the review process.
Correct.
So, since you've been there and done that, kind of both ends.
Yes.
What are in what structural process ways is the layperson reviewer involved versus your sort of typical reviewer?
Same.
And it's the same, and their input is considered just as important. The lead reviewer is always a science reviewer.
Okay.
But the secondary or tertiary reviewer, that gets mixed up. So the secondary or tertiary reviewer may be the layperson, and the layperson gives the same opinions, the same whatever. Their viewpoint on the grant often actually slants the review and changes the scores of the scientific reviewers who may not have recognized aspects of patient engagement. Interestingly, sometimes, for example, there was a grant recently that I was reviewing in a PCORI study section, and I was the one who, even though I was the scientific reviewer, I was the one who said, yeah, they have this whole engagement plan, but at the end of the engagement plan, they say that if there are disagreements between the scientific team and the patient, community member, that they'll default to the science members. And I said, that's completely unacceptable. There was no consensus building plan or arbitration about that. It was just like, it'll default. And I said, that makes it completely unacceptable. So, but the laypersons, the lay people are usually providing more of that insight on kind of is this real engagement? Have they considered the things that might be important to patients? Is it clear to me why this will be important to patients and how patients are going to be involved in every step? But PCORI has very, very specific guidelines for patient involvement at every step of the process. And the place that most grants fall down, in fact, is in patient involvement in the writing of the grant and the selection of which outcomes are going to be used and the selection of which methods are going to be used. And according to PCORI, patients are supposed to be involved in that. So.
Other reviewers' comments?
So I had a question regarding, it was related to the specific aims. Again, the focus was on the cancer community and the stakeholders and assessing, awareness and knowledge as well as whether or not there were available services and programs. But again, I guess the question that I had is that what is the perspective also of cancer survivors, and would that be slightly sort of different in terms of identifying other existing supports? Is it an issue of of a lack of supports, or what are the other barriers that exist that you may not get the answer to by only focusing on the stakeholders?
Yeah, and if that's not clear, sorry.
No.
She said she had a question. Rhetorical question.
Yeah, I did.
So I just have a few comments that if you're going to do a needs assessment, then your methods for CBPR are going to really need to carry the science forward, and you're going to have to focus more on CBPR than on the needs assessment, because folks don't always see needs assessment. They don't typically see it as a scientific process because it doesn't lead to a direct outcome. Most times. So I think you need to do that, is really focus on the CBPR, because I think that was a strength of this. Additionally, I thought, you never used the word innovation. I actually did a search in the review. And I know from about 15 years of reviewing for ARC and PCORI and NIH that the reviewers, when they get really tired and frustrated, they will sometimes do a search for the word if they can't find the section. So when I did the search for innovation and didn't find it, I thought, you're not really kind of hitting us over the head saying this is important research and we're going to break ground here. So I would just say, don't forget that. The other thing is, you have a research goal, really stay with the research question whenever you can. And if you had come up with a research question, you would have had the for what that you mentioned earlier that you don't see in the goal. Like, for what purpose will this? I think that's important. The other thing I want to say is a strength of the qualitative. I like the qualitative analytic plan because I do some qualitative analysis, and this I thought was really, really well done. So that's mine. In terms of scoring, I do have a different score. So I thought, in terms of meeting the CEO mission, it was exceptional because it really does meet the mission the way the mission is worded. And I thought, other than, you got a lot of comments, I still think it's closer to outstanding in terms of the research question and what it can be, CBPR, and then the analytic methods.
Yeah, I agree with Diane. I was also very impressed by the data analysis statistical plan. I thought this was very well described. And also another strength that I found was the dissemination of results and future research plans. I think that was also very well described and explained. I'm not quite sure about. I understand the importance of showing the ultimate goal, but this is only a one-year project, so I'm not quite sure when you say outcomes. Do you mean by outcomes to achieve in the one-year project?
Correct.
But improving the health of the patients, in 1 year.
No. In fact, interestingly, on the next, looking ahead, I will say they said they were going to do that, and that was too ambitious. That isn't the point. But the point is that there's an ultimate goal, and then there's what this project's going to do, and neither of those was made clear to me, which doesn't mean anything.
I guess, the ultimate goal, I agree with Sima, I'm not quite sure. My understanding of the project was that it was a needs assessment, so it seemed to me that it really answered, to this premise, this question. So I also gave, very good score.
Yeah, I also reviewed this proposal. And I agree that the methodology was really, really very, very good and very strong. And I think where this need was also innovation. So a needs assessment is imperative, but it's not really innovative unless you sort of describe to me why the way that you're going to do it is pretty innovative, and I think that it is, and it could be described better to support that. And then to sort of give the so what next. So I also really, what I wrote on this was this is a nice setup for a query application. So if the next step was we're doing this because then we can do sort of comparative effectiveness, trial and do, through query, and this would be setting the stage for that. That would be very, that would be compelling. But I thought I scored it pretty high as well because I thought that internally it was very well written, very clear methodology, and good engagement, and fit with CEO.
Yes, and and listening to everyone else, I really do think that the biggest discrepancy between, and this happens at NIH all the time, but the biggest discrepancy between my score and everybody else's score was that that I really felt that lack of explaining why your community engagement of the cancer community and the stakeholders was going to change our understanding of why cancer survivors versus everybody else doesn't exercise was just not at all clear to me. And to me, that was like a moderate to significant weakness that nobody exercises. Why is this honestly, why is this different? Is it because cancer survivors don't understand that exercising will make better for them? Is that cancer survivors, due to the disease and the treatments, are weaker and tireder, and it's even harder for them to exercise? Is it that there's stigma or whatever? Are they afraid? Is there anxiety about exercise causing health problems or recurrence? And just kind of even just a little bit of that overview, I think, in the context of a strong qualitative method plan and a really good team and all of that would have boosted my score a fair bit. But lacking that, I think I felt that, I gave it a 5, which is strong, but with at least one moderate weakness. And that was it. There was this one weakness that I considered moderate.
And in fairness, that's the real world.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will put in, a grant, and you will have people who really look at it more critically from a certain lens because of their expertise. And in the end, unfortunately, sometimes you only get back the score and some comments, and you don't really know why this person loved it and this person didn't. And so therefore, you're kind of stuck in the dark trying to
usually keep the good. Usually good program officers will make that fairly clear in both the summary and the pink sheets will sort of say there was. They're actually, the good thing is that NIH isn't worried to say there was disagreement among the reviewers of the significance of this weakness that was identified, and so that, I've both seen and gotten pink sheets that have that, and so that's the good news is that you can sometimes understand it, and I have certainly gotten pink sheets where one reviewer was like, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and one reviewer was like, what the heck were you thinking? And that happens too.
Yeah.
But in this case, it wasn't a fatal flaw, but it was one moderate weakness to me.
Thank you.
All right, Teresa, so you're going to be our grand finale.
Okay. So I do want to preface it, but I think I'm probably the most junior on the panel. So as far as sort of reviewing other proposals, I've worked with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Corey, and I've submitted an NIH award, but, I just to put that out there.
Well, I think credentials as a funded recipient of a pilot award are actually really important because that is a reasonable next step for a lot of people. So.
Right. So I'll first give just a background of the study, the intervention of providing educational sessions within both faith-based communities as well as community centers is, it's a very thoughtful, approach, and using that setting as a way to change behaviors among families. So I thought in terms of the background and laying out the strengths of the proposal, it was a really strong introduction. My question now had to do with the sort of lack of the references of making a case for why the use of faith-based communities are such an important approach to addressing childhood obesity. The connection for me wasn't made. In addition, in terms of the background, I had questions as far as which counties it was taking place. Again, sort of the focus of faith-based and civic community organizations and making the connection to obesity prevention. And I would assume there's probably just a lot of literature that uses faith-based communities as a way to implement, if not obesity, other types of reducing other chronic conditions. And so if there's not specific literature for obesity, of using that as a way to frame your questions, your research questions. I also had questions regarding your focus is on education and knowledge increase, but it doesn't necessarily highlight the setting that you're using. So you talk about using sort of a social ecological approach, and yet you don't necessarily use that in the intervention at all. So how can you capitalize on the setting that you're using to design and implement your program? I also had other questions regarding just the population itself. You talked about grades 1 through 9 and also a family approach. I didn't know whether or not you were going to include both, the family, using one adult from the family and the kids. I would think that given also the wide range of 1st through 9th graders, you would need perhaps different approaches for the younger, for the youth versus the adults. And then I just wanted to also, in terms of in terms of talking about the significance, I think that there is sort of a lot of opportunity to use the settings to reduce obesity. As far as sort of the innovative part of the study, again, the use of faith-based and civic associations, there's also sort of the downside of using them, and that often are you trying to change the behaviors of people in specific communities, and therefore you need to have more information about where are the residents coming from. Do they live in the neighborhoods? Are they coming outside of the neighborhoods to use the facilities? So questions as to it's innovative, but innovative for whom? Who is the, again, questions about the population. And that might be related to sort of addressing it in the background of why faith-based organizations are important to use in these particular settings. And then in terms of the approach, you mentioned also the strength of your approach had to do with the use of wellness communities in the two settings. But I had more questions about how they'll actually be used. And you talked a bit about the use of this study being an evaluation study, but I wasn't clear on whether or not this is actually an evaluation study versus of using the two environments to look at, maybe you're looking at whether or not one serves as a better approach than the other. I just had questions about the approach that you were using. And questions also, again, about the goal of the study. why, again, the questions about why you're focusing only on behavioral changes. And it seems like there are opportunities also to think about factors that might prevent or support the behavior changes within the community settings. But overall, I thought that there was just a lot of potential in terms of the use of both faith-based and community association settings as a way to reduce obesity. And I think it just maybe going back and sort of better describing and giving an argument for why that's the case, and in particular in Delaware or specific communities within Delaware that you'll be working in.
So I totally agree with Theresa on everything you said. I have a few more comments. It's unclear for me from the introduction that the introduction starts where whether faith-based and community-based organizations could join their efforts and fight obesity. And so it seems that in the introduction, what I understood was that you would study the collaboration of the two types of organization, and that the overall, the collaboration of these two types of organization will make a stronger influence, will have a stronger influence on lives of these children and lives of this community. But then in the proposal, then it seems that you want to compare the two types of organization, which is really not what gets out of the introduction. So I think, for me, that was an issue. The other in the methodology, one of the major issue I think is the time. Measuring, expecting, within a year a decrease in obesity with such a program is probably a little unrealistic. So it seems to me that the evaluation of the program should probably not start with evaluating whether the children are losing weight, but more evaluating and this is mentioned, evaluating the knowledge of and the effectiveness of the intervention on knowledge and attitudes. I think the specific aims could be a little simpler, in fact, in this way. That's what that's all. And I agree with Theresa. The significance of this project is really high because obesity is an important issue, and to have this collaboration between the faith and the civic organizations, I think, is a very important point.
I am recused from this application because I spoke to one of the investigators, and I may be helping in the future. So,
yeah, I agree that this is incredibly important and significant. I mean, obviously we know that childhood obesity is like the epidemic. So interestingly, like I almost said that the biggest problem was this almost like a missing step between kind of the goals of the program and the outcomes of the methods. And interestingly, in the piece here, we have a piece that says to give a score on the methods are sound and likely to be successful. And I said, if clarified, I think they will be. But right now, I'm not so sure of that. Because as Claudine said, I think it's very hard to get the proposed outcomes of, in 1 year of actual changes to obesity. So the question is, are there alternative primary and secondary outcomes, and kind of what are the primary outcomes for this period versus what are the eventual outcomes for the future research? And this idea that, especially with small grants, pilot grants, but any grant that has a limited time frame,
what you do want to make clear, I think that what was good with this grant versus some of the others is that it did make clear kind of the end game goal, but it didn't take the first step goal as well. And I think in some of the other projects we've seen, well, this is what we're going to do now, but there was no and then this is why it's important for later, right? And you really have to have both of those pieces. One is really sort of the significance, and then the other is more the approach. And so I think that it has a great opportunity to make the impact that it's very in line with the cell, as was said. But I just think that it's important that the steps of the methods and the appropriate outcomes are made clearer, because I never kind of got what exactly would be measured. Other than that 1 year change in obesity, which I was like, and I'm not going to see anything of that.
So again, I also looked at this. I agree with everything basically that was said. I was thrown off initially with the research question. I wasn't sure. I think I read two things. One talked about comparative effectiveness as interventions, and the other talked about, whether a whole person approach, would help. So I wasn't clear what either of those, meant. So I thought just, going back and sort of, clearly stating what would be the actual research question for this. Minor thing, but can be sticky sometimes. The description of the problem was good, but it was really using old data. I think it said something about 1980 to 1995. I was like, that was within 10 years ago. So updating the data can be important and can sort of change the way that people are reading it. And then I agree with what Tirza started out with. That the rationale for we all feel like, of course, we need to do faith-based interventions and community organizations, but really need to put that into a rationale or a theoretical framework for why that is the right approach. I think spending some time on justifying that will be important. The methods, I thought, just really needed some clarity. So, even around, which faith-based organizations, which faiths, how is it descriptive of the community that we're working with? What exactly is the community that we're, targeting? And again, where exactly would this happen? How many, who would deliver the intervention? Who would participate in it? And what exactly would be the measure? I think all of that is kind of the easy part. Like, you just figure it out and write it up, and that would be great. And I think that was it. I thought it really had a lot of potential. Clearly, it is in line with the Excel CEO mission, and just with some real clarity around methods, this could be very, very good.
All right. I think we have reached the natural end. With time to spare, so we can commence small talk and trips to Bon Ton, whatever. Running on to your next meeting, whatever you prefer. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank all the reviewers, for the perspective. Lots of receiving your input.
And again, thank you all for bearing with me. This is my time. This is my first review, so I certainly am not confident that I gave you all the details and directions that you need. But I learned from this process, and next year it'll be spot on fabulous.
And thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
And congratulations to everyone. I mean, really great job. Really great proposals.
Thank you.
This is helpful.
Yeah, this is very incredibly helpful. Very helpful.
So what's the next step for everybody now?
That was
You should film me.
Now that you are free.
Well, the two proposals that have been given approval will start.
Yeah.
So we're, putting in motion cost center magic from A to B, things that I know nothing about, but I'm trying to help facilitate. So they will start. And, we really are hopeful that it will be the beginning of a good team getting some pilot data that can take a next step. For the other two teams, they've been given the opportunity to revise and resubmit. So we would like to have that. What was the date I said, Kristen?
I know our recommendation committee is meeting March 11th.
March 11th.
So I'm sure that'll be at least before then.
Yeah. So the sooner the better. Obviously, we're the same people who made the initial decision are being assembled to make the revise and resubmit decision, which is good. Rather than trying to guess and essentially hit a moving target. So I'm just looking at the date. So the next.
I have just a quick question. Are any of the, I know this was mock, so to speak, and not official in any way, but are any of the comments, or were these mock reviewers asked to submit comments that would inform the actual resubmission review?
These people today?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, this is just sort of FYI.
Gotcha.
A part of it is, as you know, Brian, we didn't originally plan for a revise and resubmit process.
Sure.
So admittedly, there's sort of some confusion of having a mock review and then having a re-review. But hopefully, nonetheless, both will be, helpful.
But did you get comments from the first submission?
We did. I'm not sure, at least for the one that I'm involved with, I'm not sure how helpful they were in terms of. But that's nothing to do with the review.
Yeah, well, but you've got a couple of us who do reviews nationally with NIH or Corey. So you're probably, from these reviews, and I think, don't underestimate yourself, because being in the writing of grants and getting funded, you really do know things on the ground that could be helpful. So.
And I would tell you, if you want, just like in a regular resubmission, you get to essentially either do a cover letter or a section that is sort of response. You are welcome to, if you feel there's a discrepancy, I think it's fair for you to say, this is the feedback we were given in the mock review, therefore we decided not to respond to comments. Do you know what I mean? Or why, just like.
I was just asking on that.
So if you guys could, please, get me your revised proposals by the start of the day on March 3rd, so I can give my people who are meeting a full week to look at them. I would be very, very appreciative. If you need more time, let me know, and then I can give people a heads up that, they might be getting things a little more towards the end.
What was March the 11th? What was that?
That's a Wednesday.
No.
No, that's
No, that was just.
I think that's the recommendation committee will meet to look over the proposal again.
Okay.
So just so you know, what will happen is the same people will meet, they will look at the revised proposals, and they're just going to make a yes/no decision of whether or not they feel like, the proposals now, are, essentially should be funded. If it's, a yes, well, really, regardless of what decision that group makes, it will be put in front of the executive committee to agree or disagree with that decision. So it won't be like I'm calling you the day after they meet to give you an answer. Do you know what I mean? Like we'll have a sort of preliminary answer that you won't know that will then be signed off by the executive committee. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of. Issues, problems, concerns, questions.
And you guys know, if you have any questions, ask Heather or contact Jennifer Passarella, the program coordinator. We've got some staff that would really support you in your projects. So, and I'm always available.
This is is fantastic. I mean, they really absolutely. I mean, the whole thing has been awesome. I've really enjoyed it.
I'm thinking about next year making it 8 to noon and shortening, trying to condense the duration of the sessions. I can't, if anything, I have to increase the total amount of time, because like things I tried to condense, we ended up having to re-expand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To me, it's hard for people who are working to find time to do this, but it's better to get the pain over in a big dose.
Yeah, but that's true. If you come from 4 weeks versus 7 weeks.
They would like to see what their initial second half. At least that's what the survey said. Okay. So I can get that scheduled if you guys are still wanting the second half of the qualitative analysis.
I had said that at one point. I don't know if it was right now or like it said kind of like, yeah, when you're there, it's probably better for me to come back closer to it right now. So yeah, I'd be open.
Yeah, you guys contact me and let me know when you guys are heading to that feedback.
Yeah, so we're in a short term.
But I think, yeah, sometimes you have.
Yeah, we said those things, so I'd say in the meantime, so, and I know it's geared as the first
Right.
My turn then.
So yeah, but I'd say that's what's been doing that.
It's interesting. One of the reasons.
That being said, I should tell you that Heather mentioned it.
As considered the comment
at the conference in Charleston, sort of giving what happens is so that students in this will show instead of moving cars instead of we've got more time. So yeah, and for what we want to do,
all of these, but concepts that
yes.
and that was
I was written down
because both my research and running a program like this. So I should definitely be part of your
So, right, schedule you with that.
you know, I think
Well, my handwriting hasn't changed.
Sorry, mine's got worse.
Yeah. Mine just gets smaller. I just I was looking at something that I need to write up for in big letters the other day. Like that's why it's getting smaller. It's kind of looks like it might be
For me too, because I'm right now in the early stages of making to reduce any severity. And with my students, a lot of my work is around
She had to. That's what it was called. What they're doing is 1%. And there's one of my
so this whole idea of
and then it's the neural ones. What's up for I repeated what I
So we have a lot of research from pregnancy.
I mean, it really does.
And so I was really nice grant very much like it is. Only extensively 25 and you had to show mine is in a pediatric practice,
and it's
which is to transfer to practice so that they spend stress and by getting asset so I have moms and pediatricians will work with the moms on home-based parenting and have enhanced case management with the pediatric practice and the doctors. So they're actually so we're just starting
to start steering people away from because now these are actually customers.
It's good because it will really for the next we can do we'd be better off because we recognize that population that's most affected by this right now. Right. So there's
we can do a study and
mortality for any infants or morbidity. So, there's an epidemic, so we would show that we were really doing a multi-site intervention and event severity by training the mom during pregnancy, mindfulness and mindfulness. So, one of my physician trainees recently what do you feel your passion is? Not related to that, related to what I just which I'm using for I thought that would be good for their
yeah,
so I put out a little bit of money for her. So I took some of the proposals very well thought out, and I just gave it to her. Here, my card, already gift cards. So, you know, so we had some more preliminary things that was really good too. You know, we could engage more.
The implementation, because I was thinking they would
I'll help in any way that I can. My schedule is really tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
But, you know, again, tiny piece of. Thank you so much for meditating. At least you can
right now it's which I think
Well,
you could work in hiring.
When the organization here
so one of the things about internet is really not academic. It's been here
No.
so being at the courses for 12 hours, the more it's some giving an opportunity to other people, which I really feel.
But I really for that.
How you doing, buddy? Is it going to snow that we might get South Carolina? What did you think of the
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything that gets me beyond just sit there and talk about but actually that we could write about somebody else to pick up
They're kind of like, you know, some organization wants to do have like a set path that they follow.
They just write to the CDC and the materials. Yeah.
And they just take it off.
I feel like I see all these doodles, but nothing ever comes of them.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so they're on my calendar somewhere. I won't worry about that. You know, this was, Tears' review, I think, was really important. I wrote down what she said, because I never got the information because they couldn't pull it up. I guess Heather could, but Erin couldn't, and I didn't know.
Okay.
Well, if you think it would be helpful as a final review, comes in enough time, because I have a really packed schedule, but we set it in advance. And if Brian, if you need me to review, I will. I think you got great feedback today.
It was good, and I think one of the key things is something that we've been going back and forth on sort of this whole process is, should we focus on the impact of the intervention, or should we focus on the impact of the innovative collaborations that are taking place?
Yeah, so it's too much to do both.
Yeah, I would love this to be
So the other question is, do you do the kids or do you do the I think you have more. I think you have more ability to do the faith-based community.
Right. So when after Europe, now we know what happened.
And I think the innovation in this lies in partnerships, and not necessarily like the part of with the partnerships in place, you can conceivably intervene in any program or in any direction you want to. But until you sort of identify what elements of that collaboration need to be in place in which you can agree on certain, shared goals and visions and that sort of thing. I think that's where, to me, that's where, and I was really excited in working with Beta in the sense that there are some really interesting, different approaches to what type of partners that are coming to the table, from the NAACP to the civic associations to the faith-based community. We haven't seen those type of collaborations be effective since the civil rights. I mean, really, honestly, from an equity standpoint, you can conceivably say that this issue are civil rights issues.
That's why I think it's better than school. That's why I think it is. I mean, a secondary, you could put it you'll also reach out to schools, but wouldn't it be nice if families informed the schools on kids and not the other way around? I mean, schools informing, it just hasn't worked for like 30 years where schools inform families. That's just not, that's the wrong direction. All right, good luck. Good luck.
Thank you. Oh, and I wanted to ask, do you have, I don't have,
I think Jen has.
Are there any other comments from last time?
It's in a good place to be.
Not the first. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Yeah.
I contacted them and said, this is what we're doing. Just a heads up, like whatever the fake sheet is for the thing. But nothing beyond that. There was no approval.
Green light.
Yeah, we said, described what the process was. That we weren't funded yet, and that it would be, we'd go through this thing. And so that's where we sort of left it.
All right.
But
Do you have to do OSP before IRB? Or
before submission of any, and that, I mean, technically the requirement is before submission of any, so. And we did, so they know about the project in the context of the ACE Awards, and the fact that we, after the first review, realized that we would be asked to resubmit later. We just never took it any further at that point. But if we had heard that, it would be one of the funded projects, I think we would have busted our butts a little bit harder to finalize the OSP thing. But so, I'll talk to them to those comments, and then
You guys can't
based on
I don't know yet.
there's some
we're strict to the rule of the submissions if we're not giving them enough time to review it. But I don't know. I think she's chewing on the fact that the final decision wouldn't be made until executive meeting. So maybe
See you later, Liz.
See you, Levada. See you at 3.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with your project and your personal.
No, well, thank you so much
I hope
for everything.
we'll have some relief soon.
Yeah, no, it's been, the Bryn Mawr program's been good. Like,
Was it good?
Yeah, I think
It's not easy if you live down in Newark. It's a little bit of a hunt to get there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about an hour.
Yeah.
So I could have done with the one, I didn't realize about